Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Thursday, January 29th, 2026.
Here we are again.
You know, if you've been scrolling through the headlines this week, just looking at the news feed, and you're feeling this distinct sensation of vertigo, like the ground is physically shifting beneath your feet, I want you to know you are not imagining it.
No, you are definitely not alone in that feeling. It's been an intense few days.
It really has. We have a stack of sources today that, when you lay them all out side by side, it paints a picture of a world that is in a state of absolute total flux. And I don't use that word lightly.
Not at all.
We are talking about the literal shifting of cosmic theories, the rewriting of our own biological history, and some incredibly volatile shifts in global markets and, geopolitical
It
lines.
really is a day where the theme is the great rewrite. It feels like that's the only way to describe it. We're seeing maps being redrawn in South America, history books being corrected on the origins of disease,
Right.
and even the code of life DNA being treated like it's just software that we can now debug.
Exactly. So our mission today isn't just to list off the headlines. I mean, you can get a bulleted list anywhere. We want to connect the what to the why. We're going to look at humanity's aggressively competitive push into the stars, these tension points in Venezuela and Iran that are reshaping global alliances,
Same time.
and this massive AI infrastructure boom that is kind of ironically forcing us to return to a 20th century energy policy.
And we have some curveballs in the data, too. Things you really wouldn't expect to be connected to, say, global economics or geopolitics.
We do. We're going to discuss why some scientists believe a very specific sea creature might hold the biological key to, well, immortality.
Which, as terrifying as it is, fascinating, honestly. It's a real can of worms.
And why your next colleague might not be a coder in the traditional sense, but a vibe coder.
I still struggle to say that with a straight face. I
Yeah.
really do. But the economic implications of it are actually quite serious.
They are. Plus, we have to talk about gold hitting $5,600 an ounce. We need to talk about what that price tag is actually signaling about the health of the United States dollar.
It is a massive alarm bell ringing in the financial markets.
Yeah.
You can't ignore that number.
Okay, so let's unpack this. I want to start big. Universal scale. I want to look at the tree of life.
Let's do it all the way back to the beginning.
Because I remember distinctly in biology class, and I'm sure you do too, being taught that the sponge was the basement level of the animal kingdom, the first branch on the tree.
Absolutely.
It just sits there, it filters water, it has no brain. It's the prototype for everything else that came after.
Right. That has been the morphological gold standard for decades. And the logic is, it's linear and it's comforting. Evolution goes from simple to complex.
Simple to complex, easy.
Sponges have no nervous system, no muscles, no gut. So logically, they must be the first step away from single-celled organisms. Just makes sense.
But the research we have in front of us from Popular Mechanics today is saying maybe not so fast.
It's flipping the entire tree upside down. Scientists have apparently identified the actual first branch on the tree of life. And it isn't the sponge. It's the comb jelly.
The catenophore.
The catenophore, exactly.
Okay, so for anyone listening who's picturing a standard jellyfish, what's the difference? How is a comb jelly different?
Well, visually, they're stunning. They're translucent, gelatinous, and they have these rows of cilia, these tiny hairs that refract light like rainbows when they move.
Oh, wow.
But biologically, they're significantly more complex than a sponge. And that right there is the problem with the timeline.
Because they have a nervous system.
They have neurons. They have a complex way of hunting and moving. They're active predators in their own, microscopic way. A sponge just sits.
So walk me through the logic here. If the comb jelly comes first on the evolutionary timeline and it has a brain,
A rudimentary one, but yes.
and the sponge comes later and it doesn't have one, what does that mean?
You see the paradox. It implies one of two things. And honestly, both of them rewrite our fundamental understanding of biology.
Okay.
Option one. The common ancestor of everything, including the sponge, had a nervous system, and the sponge just lost it. It evolved to be simpler because that was more efficient for its environment.
It de-evolved. It just decided that thinking was too much work and gave up.
In a sense, yes. It abandoned complexity, which is a wild thought in itself. Option
That's
two is even more provocative.
Go on.
It implies that the nervous system, the very mechanism that allows us to think and feel and perceive it, evolved twice.
Independently. Twice.
Once in the lineage that led to the comb jelly, and they began completely separately in the lineage that led to us and jellyfish and insects and everything else.
That suggests that complexity isn't some kind of cosmic fluke. It suggests that evolution might have a bias, or at least a tendency, toward creating intelligence, or at least creating neural connectivity.
Exactly. It suggests the universe is almost hardwired to produce complex life, which feels like a perfect bridge to this next piece of research from, I think it was space.com, regarding proteins before planets.
Right. This is the idea that the ingredients for life don't actually need a planet to cook them up.
Correct. The old model, you remember this, was the primordial soup. You need a warm little puddle on Earth, a lightning strike, some volcanic heat, and boom, you get amino acids.
The classic Stanley Urey experiment.
Exactly. But new spectroscopy evidence is showing that amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, can form in the icy vacuum of interstellar space.
In space ice, at nearly absolute zero, how is that even possible?
The chemical bonds can form in the ice grains themselves, spurred on by cosmic rays. This means that comets and asteroids aren't just dead rocks, they are delivery systems. They're carrying the starter kit.
So when a planet like Earth is formed, the raw materials for life are already baked into the crust from the very beginning?
It's likely universal, which makes the universe feel a lot less lonely, but at the same time, much more crowded with potential.
Speaking of crowded, let's look out at the cosmos itself. We have a flood of new data from the James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST, and the Chandra X-ray Observatory, and it feels like every single time we open a new file from JWST, we have to hold a funeral for cosmological theory.
It has been a brutal few years for the standard model of cosmology. To put it mildly, the telescope is just too good. It's seeing things that, according to our math, just shouldn't exist yet.
So what did they break this time?
Well, they found a structure called Jade's ID-1. It sounds like a droid from a sci-fi movie, I know.
It does.
But it's a proto-cluster of galaxies, a giant collection of
A
them.
cluster of galaxies?
But the timing is the key. This structure exists just 1 to 2 billion years after the Big Bang. In cosmic time, that is infancy.
Right, the universe should still be a mess at that point. Hot,
Yeah.
chaotic, unorganized.
It should be. But Jade's ID-1 is massive. It's 20 trillion times the mass of our sun, and it's highly structured. It's mature.
It's too big, too soon.
It is exactly like walking into a nursery and finding a toddler building a fully functional internal combustion engine from scratch. It just doesn't compute.
That's a great way to put it.
Gravity, as we understand it, shouldn't have been able to pull that much matter together that quickly. It suggests the universe grew up significantly faster than our equations say is possible.
And we're seeing the same thing with supermassive black holes, right? They're also showing up way too early in the timeline.
Way too early. It's the same problem. These things are huge, and they shouldn't have had time to eat enough to get that big.
So, do we have an explanation? Is the leading theory dark matter?
That's the leading candidate. The idea is that dark matter halos in the early universe were much denser and more active than we thought, acting like gravitational seeds for this super rapid growth. But again, we're rewriting the textbook as we go. It's all theory at this point.
And amid all this theory, we also got that beautiful image of Pismis 24.
Oh, yes, in the Lobster Nebula. It looks just like a winter scene, this sparkling cluster where massive stars are being born. It's a good reminder that even though the universe is ancient, it's still very, very active.
It's a reminder that our map of reality is still just a sketch. But let's bring it closer to home. Let's talk about low Earth orbit, because while the ancient universe is a mystery, the near future of space is rapidly becoming an industrial zone.
It really is. 2026 is becoming the year of infrastructure in space. It's no longer just about flags and footprints, it's about economics.
And we have the latest SpaceX updates. Starship version 3 is targeting a mid-March launch.
Bigger, more powerful. This is the vehicle that's designed to get just massive tonnage to orbit cheaply. That's the whole game.
But the real story, I think, isn't the rocket itself, it's the capitalization. There are serious rumors of an IPO.
Yes. The financial press is buzzing about a June 2026 IPO for SpaceX. And the valuation they're throwing around is something like $1.5 trillion.
$1.5 trillion. That puts it in the same league as Amazon, as Google. That's a monster.
It is. And the timing. Elon Musk reportedly wants to align the IPO with his birthday and a planetary alignment of Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter.
That is classic Elon. He never, ever misses an opportunity for a bit of showmanship.
Never.
But beyond the astrology, what does an IPO actually do for them?
It provides the liquidity for the Mars colony. It's that simple. You cannot colonize another planet on your company's cash flow alone. You need a massive capital injection from the public markets.
But they aren't the only ones looking at space as an economy. China is making a very specific, very strategic play here.
The space-based AI data centers.
This just blows my mind. Explain this.
This is fascinating. China is laying out plans to launch these within 5 years. The idea is to put their high-performance computing clusters in orbit around the Earth.
But why? What's the advantage? Is it just for cooling? I mean, the vacuum of space is pretty cold.
Cooling is definitely part of it, but the main driver is solar energy. In space, you have 247 access to unfiltered high-intensity solar power.
No clouds, no night, no atmospheric interference.
Exactly. You completely solve the energy bottleneck for these power-hungry AI systems, which we're definitely going to talk about later, by moving the hardware off-planet.
It's the ultimate cloud computing.
Literally. And it creates a new kind of strategic high ground. If all your critical data processing happens in orbit, it's much harder to target physically in a conflict, and it's harder to sanction economically. It is the new high ground in the most literal sense.
That bridges us perfectly to the engine that's driving all of this. Artificial intelligence. Because if China feels the need to put servers in space, the demand for compute power down here on Earth must be absolutely insatiable.
It is. And wouldn't you know it, Ray Kurzweil is back in the headlines.
The futurist, the guy who pretty much nailed his predictions about the internet boom, he's doubling down on the singularity.
He is. His date is still 2045. That's his prediction for when human and machine intelligence merge into one. But the more immediate date he's flagged is 2029 for the arrival of AGI, artificial general intelligence.
2029, that's just 3 years away. That feels incredibly aggressive.
It does. It feels way too soon. But his whole argument is based on what he calls the law of accelerating returns. Technology doesn't move in a straight line. It moves exponentially.
Right, and we think linearly, so we always underestimate what can happen in the next 5 years.
We're always looking in the rearview mirror.
Well, if we look at the progress just from this week alone, the curve is definitely bending sharply upward. Let's talk about vibe coding.
Oh, yes. This is the story of the week for me. I can't get over it.
LinkedIn is actually launching a certification for this. It sounds like a joke, but explain the utility here. What is vibe coding?
It's basically the democratization of software engineering.
Right.
Traditionally, to build an app, to build a website, you needed to speak machine Python, C++, Dash, Java, whatever. You had to know the syntax, where every semicolon and bracket went.
A very specialized skill.
Very. Vibe coding is about speaking human. You just describe the function, the intent, the vibe of what you want to an LLM, a large language model, and the AI handles all the messy syntax for you.
So I don't need to know how to code. I just need to have a really clear idea of what I want the program to do.
Precisely. It shifts the required skill set from syntax proficiency to systems architecture and clear communication. You become the conductor of the orchestra, the AI plays all the instruments.
But isn't there a huge risk there? If I don't understand the code the AI spits out, how do I know it's secure? How do I know it hasn't just hallucinated a massive backdoor vulnerability?
That is the massive gaping blind spot in all of this. We are seeing this black box problem everywhere already. I mean, just look at the CISO breach this week.
Right. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, these are the people who are supposed to be protecting the entire U.S. government from cyber threats.
And their acting chief, the guy at the very top, accidentally uploaded sensitive government documents to a public instance of ChatGPT.
Why on earth would he do that?
To summarize them. To vibe code a report, essentially. He forgot, or maybe just didn't realize, that the public model learns from everything you feed it. He just gave state secrets to a publicly accessible AI.
That is a terrifying lapse in protocol from the top dog. It's unbelievable.
It proves that our human behavior is lagging way behind the capability of the tools. We are handing these incredibly powerful tools to people who don't fully grasp the data hygiene required to use them safely.
And all the while, the tools themselves are just getting sharper and sharper. DeepMind has a new model that can predict protein structures just from a DNA sequence.
This connects right back to our biology segment.
Yeah.
If an AI can accurately predict how a complex molecule is going to fold and behave just by reading its genetic code,
Then you can design drugs to interact with it perfectly.
you can design drugs that are 100% compatible with your specific genetics. No side effects.
Yeah,
True personalized medicine.
it's a revolution.
It is. And you're seeing it on the consumer side, too. Google Chrome is rolling out Auto Browse, which is a Gemini agent that just surfs the web for you to find answers. Apple just launched its Creator Studio Pro, bundling AI tools into their video and music software.
We're moving from just using software to collaborating with these AI agents.
And the open source community isn't sleeping either. RCAI just released Trinity, a 400 billion parameter model to compete with Meta's Llama. The pace is just relentless.
But, and this is a huge but, all of this requires electricity, a staggering amount of it. And we are, it seems, running out.
This is the hard physical constraint on Kurzweil's singularity. This is the wall we're about to hit. AI data centers are projected to consume up to 70% of the available grid capacity in certain tech hubs.
The existing grids simply cannot handle that.
Not with wind and solar alone, it can't. They're too intermittent. Data centers need constant 247 baseload power. So the market and now the government have decided on a solution.
Nuclear.
It's the nuclear renaissance in
Right.
full swing. Standard Nuclear, a startup, raised $140 million this week. But the much bigger story is that the Department of Energy, under the Trump administration, is actively loosening safety rules.
Deregulation to move faster.
Exactly. They are fast-tracking the construction of new reactors, especially on government-owned land. We are seeing a situation where the raw demand for AI compute is literally rewriting 50 years of cautious nuclear safety policy.
Because if you want the vibe coding and the AI agents, you need the uranium rods to power them.
That's the equation. Tech progress is forcing regulatory, well, regression in some people's eyes, or at least streamlining, as the administration calls it.
It's a fascinating and slightly terrifying system loop. AI needs energy, energy needs nuclear, nuclear needs deregulation.
Everything is connected.
Let's pivot from that. Because while we are here debating the ethics of AI and building new rockets, the geopolitical map is, well, it's catching fire. We have to talk about Venezuela.
This is the biggest story in the Americas right now, by far.
We have confirmed reports that Nicolas Maduro has been captured or abducted, depending on which news source you read, by U.S. forces in the capital, Caracas.
It is a full-blown regime change operation. The U.S. government is calling it an arrest and a restoration of democratic order. On the other side, outlets like Telesur are calling it a kidnapping and blatant imperialism.
And Marco Rubio, who is now the Secretary of State, is right at the center of this.
His testimony this week was very, very careful. He noted good progress, but he also walked back some of the earlier threats of an immediate, full-scale military invasion.
So what's the strategy?
It seems like he's trying to stabilize the transition to Delcy Rodriguez, who has been named the acting president. But the real story, the real leverage, is the money trail.
It always is.
All of Venezuela's oil proceeds are now being diverted into a U.S.-controlled escrow account.
That is a complete economic stranglehold.
It is. It's designed to starve out any remaining regime loyalists and, maybe more importantly, to put immense pressure on Cuba. President Trump explicitly said this week that without cheap Venezuelan oil, Cuba will collapse soon.
It feels like a return to the Monroe Doctrine, just in a 21st century, guys. The U.S. asserting total dominance over the hemisphere.
It absolutely is. But it's a high-stakes gamble. It creates a power vacuum. And if the country collapses into a full-blown civil war, who steps in to clean it up?
A very dangerous question. And speaking of war, let's turn to Iran.
The indicators here are flashing bright red across the board. We have multiple reports of a massive armada of U.S. naval assets building up in the Persian Gulf.
And Secretary Rubio used the phrase preemptive strikes in his testimony.
In diplomacy, preemptive is an incredibly heavy word. It implies you are not waiting to be attacked. It implies offensive action is actively on the table.
And it's not just the U.S. The European Union got involved.
They did. They officially designated the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, as a terrorist organization, like a huge step. It effectively removes Europe as a neutral mediator. Iran is now diplomatically cornered by the entire West.
And economically cornered, too, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. Oil prices are spiking. Anytime you threaten the free passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, the whole world pays more at the pump. For their part, Iran is claiming they are ready for war, but they are still maintaining some back channels.
It's a tinderbox. Now let's look at the other side of the world. Russia and Ukraine. The war there just grinds on. We've seen more drone strikes on trains. Russia is inviting Zelensky to Moscow for talks that nobody trusts.
Standard procedure at this point.
But I noticed a really strange financial detail this week. The Russian oil giant Lukoil is selling a bunch of its foreign assets to the Carlyle Group,
a major U.S. private equity firm.
So at the exact same time the U.S. government is arming Ukraine to fight Russia, a massive U.S. firm is buying up assets from a sanctioned Russian oil company.
It just highlights the bizarre disconnect between geopolitics and high finance. The plumbing of the global financial system often keeps flowing, even when all the diplomatic bridges have been burned to the ground. Money always finds a way.
Speaking of money finding a way, or maybe losing its way, let's talk about the global economy. The Federal Reserve held interest rates steady this week.
No surprise there. There's just way too much uncertainty in the world to make a move right now.
But the US dollar hit a 4-year low. And this brings us to what economists call the Triffin dilemma. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure, it's the fundamental paradox of being the world's global reserve currency. To be the world's currency, the U.S. has to supply the world with dollars. And the only way to do that is to run consistent trade deficits. We have to buy more stuff from the world than we sell to them.
Okay, that makes sense. We send dollars out, they send goods in.
Exactly. But if you run permanent massive deficits year after year, it eventually undermines global confidence in the value of that dollar. And President Trump is caught squarely in this trap.
How so?
He wants a strong dollar for national prestige.
Yeah.
He loves to talk about king dollar. But his other major policy goal is to bring manufacturing back home.
And to boost exports, you need a weaker dollar.
Precisely. If the dollar is too strong, American cars and steel and everything else are too expensive for foreign buyers to afford. You literally cannot have king dollar and a made-in-America manufacturing boom at the same time. And the market is sensing this fundamental confusion at the heart of U.S. policy.
And the market's response is to buy gold.
To buy a lot of gold, $5,600 an ounce.
That number is just, it's insane. I remember when $2,000 an ounce was this huge psychological barrier that seemed impossible.
A price like $5,600 isn't an investment strategy. It's a financial bunker. It is a pure fear gauge. When you see gold that high, it means big institutional capital is terrified of the bond market, they're terrified of currency debasement, and they're terrified of geopolitical conflict.
It is the ultimate safe haven trade, the flight to safety.
And silver is drafting right behind it, as it always does.
And while all these investors are fleeing to the perceived safety of gold, tech employees are facing a very harsh new reality.
The layoffs.
Amazon just cut 16,000 jobs.
Their largest single wave of layoffs ever. And they were explicit in their reasoning. They said it's part of a pivot to an AI startup model.
Which means what exactly?
It means they are cutting layers of middle management and legacy roles to pour every spare dollar of capital into the AI infrastructure and research we talked about earlier. In this new world, efficiency usually translates to redundancy for human workers.
It connects directly back to vibe coding. If the AI can do the work of 5 coders, then 4 of those coders are, from a purely economic perspective, expensive.
That is the cold, hard calculation being made in boardrooms across Silicon Valley right now. Microsoft's latest earnings report actually disappointed Wall Street because they're spending so much on this AI transition with little immediate return. But they're not stopping. They're doubling down.
Let's move from the economic climate to the actual physical climate, because if the markets are overheating, so is the planet.
We have a real tale of two extremes happening in the United States right now.
The western U.S. is facing a snow drought.
A record-low snowpack across the Rockies and the Sierra Nevada. And that means severe water shortages are coming this summer. The reservoirs simply won't refill.
And at the same time, the East Coast is bracing for a bomb cyclone.
A massive nor'easter, so way too little water in one part of the country and way too much water in the wrong form in another part.
But the truly scary story is down south. Way down south. Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica.
The Doomsday Glacier.
Why does it have that terrifying name?
It's because of its unique geometry. Thwaites acts like a cork in a bottle for the entire West Antarctic ice sheet. It sits on the edge of the continent, holding back a massive amount of ice that is sitting on land that actually slopes inward below sea level.
So that cork pops.
The rest of the ice sheet could just slide into the ocean relatively quickly. We're talking about the potential for meters of global sea level rise. It's an absolute worst-case scenario.
And scientists are on it right now.
They are. They're camping on it, risking their lives in some of the most brutal conditions on Earth. Because the ice is fracturing and melting so fast, they are worried they're running out of time to get the data before their sensors, and the glacier itself are lost to the sea.
They mentioned being worried about underwater tsunamis.
Yes. The fear is that a huge chunk could collapse underwater, sending a massive shockwave of warm ocean water deeper under the ice shelf, which would accelerate the melting even further. It's a terrifying positive feedback loop.
Is there any good news? Please tell me there is some glimmer of good news on the environmental front.
There is one, actually. A small one, but it's clever. Researchers have developed a new device that can capture CO2 directly from the air and convert it into formic acid.
Formic acid, what's that used for?
It's a useful industrial material. It can be used in some types of fuel cells, for cleaning, and in manufacturing. But the real breakthrough is that this new device works at ambient concentrations.
Meaning just regular air.
Exactly. Most carbon capture technology only works inside a dirty smokestack, where the CO2 is super concentrated. This thing could theoretically work anywhere.
So you could potentially turn our own polluted atmosphere into a raw material source.
Theoretically, yes.
Yes.
It closes the carbon loop. It's still very early days. It's just a lab prototype, but it's a step in the right direction. It's a bit of hope.
I will take that win. Finally, let's touch on society and culture, because it seems history is also getting a rewrite this week.
Syphilis.
The gift that keeps on giving.
For centuries, we have all blamed Christopher Columbus. The Columbian exchange theory has always been that his crew brought syphilis back to Europe from the Americas in 1493.
Right, it was the New World's revenge. But new DNA evidence says otherwise.
Ancient DNA, recovered from remains in Brazil and Mexico, as well as old samples from Europe, showed that the bacteria that causes the disease is much, much older. It's been with humanity for millennia on both sides of the Atlantic.
So Columbus is officially off the hook for this one.
For syphilis, yes. For pretty much everything else, the jury's still out. But we can correct the medical record on this one specific pathology.
Fair enough. And here in the U.S., we're seeing some serious domestic tension in Minneapolis.
The aftermath of the Alex Pretty shooting. A really tragic and complicated situation involving federal agents.
And the political response has been incredibly intense. The administration's border czar, Tom Homan, visited the city to, in his words, regain law and order.
And that's creating this huge clash between the federal government under President Trump and the city's mayor, Jacob Free. It really highlights how immigration and federal policing have become these massive flashpoints in domestic politics right now.
And just briefly, that very strange attack on Representative Ilhan Omar.
Right, where some kind of liquid was sprayed on her. The forensics teams have identified it, though our sources didn't specify what it was. But the investigation is active. And then you had President Trump casting doubt on the whole thing, suggesting she probably had herself sprayed.
The political rhetoric just never, ever cools down.
It doesn't seem to, no.
Okay, so to wrap all this up, let's go back to biology. We started with the origin of life, with the comb jelly and amino acids in space ice. Let's end with the evasion of death.
The sea anemone and the immortal jellyfish.
Right. Scientists are apparently obsessed with two creatures, Turritopsis dohrnii and Nematostella vectensis.
Turritopsis is the so-called immortal jellyfish. When it gets stressed or old, it doesn't just die. It reverts back to a juvenile polyp state. It's like being an 80-year-old and deciding to just turn back into a 5-year-old and start over.
A biological Benjamin Button.
But on a cellular level, it's a process called transdifferentiation. And the sea anemone, the other creature, just doesn't seem to age at all. It doesn't accumulate the cellular damage and decay that we do. It just keeps on living.
And the goal is to steal this genetic trick.
That's the billion-dollar question. We're trying to map their genomes to see if we can identify the repair mechanisms and maybe, just maybe, apply that same process to human cells one day.
So let's try to pull all of these threads together. We have AI writing its own code, a surge back to nuclear power, geopolitical maps being redrawn by force in Venezuela and threatened in Iran, and scientists trying to unlock biological immortality while the doomsday glacier threatens to flood our coastlines.
It is. A lot. It is a world in a state of hyperacceleration.
What is the through line for you in all this? What's the pattern?
For me, it's the acceleration of consequence. We are pushing the boundaries in every single direction at once. Space, biology, computing, geopolitics. But the fundamental systems that hold everything together, like the power grid, the climate, and global diplomacy, are all creaking and groaning under the strain. We're rewriting all the rules of the game, but we haven't even started to write the new instruction manual yet.
We're upgrading the software while the hardware is actively catching fire.
That is a perfect and terrifying analogy.
So the takeaway for you listening at home:
look for the connections. Don't just read the AI news without also reading the energy news. Don't watch the stock market without also watching the geopolitical friction in the Persian Gulf. It is all one single, incredibly complex, interconnected system.
And here's a thought to leave you with. Ray Kurzweil predicts we will reach the singularity by 2045. If we do achieve it, if we merge with machines and unlock the secrets of the sea anemone to gain biological immortality, will it happen before or after the doomsday glacier pops its cork? Are we racing toward a glorious finish line, or are we just accelerating toward a different kind of cliff edge?
That really is the question of the decade, isn't it?
Thanks for diving deep with us.
Being curious.
Home is planet Earth. We will see you next time.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. Good to be here. If you looked at a map of the world on Monday morning and then, looked again today, you might not recognize the geopolitical landscape. We are living through a week where the established rules of engagement didn't just bend, they broke. In a lightning-fast operation, United States forces have extracted Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, effectively decapitating a regime that has lasted over a decade. Simultaneously, Washington has pivoted to the Middle East, issuing a time-bound ultimatum to Iran backed by a naval deployment described simply as a massive armada.
It is aggressive, it is kinetic, and it is undoubtedly historic. But while all the cameras are pointed at the aircraft carriers and the empty presidential palace in Caracas, the real story might be happening on the trading floors.
And that is the central question we really need to wrestle with today. We have this collision of force and finance. Do these assertive moves represent a necessary, long overdue restoration of order, a superpower finally acting like one to clean up rogue states? Or are we watching the frantic overreach of a declining empire destabilizing a global economy that is already, hanging by a thread?
I think the answer really lies in the price tags. You can spin a military operation however you like, but the market doesn't lie. We are looking at gold smashing through records to hit, $5,300, even testing $5,600 an ounce. We see the US dollar wobbling. To me, the sirens aren't ringing in the Gulf, they're ringing in the bond markets.
I see the volatility, absolutely. But I'm going to argue today that this is the cost of surgery. The removal of a dictator in Venezuela and the hard check on Iran are calculated risks. They are necessary steps to reestablish a framework where democratic values and energy security dictate the future rather than the whims of authoritarian warlords. The market panic is a fever, but the operation was necessary to save the patient.
I'm not sure the patient is going to survive the cure. My position is that these actions are masking a structural loss of American hegemony. When you look past the shock and awe, you see allies scrambling for independent trade deals, you see the global south consolidating against the dollar, and you see capital fleeing to hard assets. This isn't a restoration of order, it's a catalyst for fragmentation.
Well, let's start in our own hemisphere, Venezuela. For years, we have talked about the humanitarian crisis there, the starvation, the mass migration, the complete collapse of a once wealthy nation. This week, the U.S. stopped talking and acted. Nicolas Maduro is in custody. Delcy Rodriguez is installed as acting president. Now, I know the immediate reaction from some corners is to scream imperialism, but let's look at the immediate, on-the-ground reality.
It's hard to look at the immediate reality without looking at the method. You have a foreign power physically removing a head of state, however disliked he may be, and essentially appointing a successor. That is a precedent that sends a shiver down the spine of every leader in the global south.
Is it a shiver or is it a sigh of relief? Look at the testimony from Secretary of State Marco Rubio this week. He described the transition as showing good and decent progress. And that's not just rhetoric. The U.S. is moving to reopen the embassy in Caracas, which has been shuttered since, 2019? They have already returned the MT Sofia, a seized oil tanker, back to Venezuelan control. These aren't the actions of a conqueror. They're the actions of a partner trying to jumpstart a failed heart.
Okay, hold on. Let's look at that heart jumpstart a little closer. You mentioned the oil tanker. The Sofia was returned, yes, but what about the revenue? The plan laid out by the administration is for the proceeds of Venezuelan oil sales to be deposited into a U.S. Treasury-controlled account.
A fiduciary measure.
A fiduciary measure? That's receivership. You are taking a sovereign nation's primary resource revenue and putting it under the direct control of a foreign finance ministry. That is not partnership. That is an allowance. And it validates exactly what critics in Latin America have been saying for decades, that U.S. intervention is ultimately about controlling the resources.
But consider the alternative. We know the track record of the Maduro regime. If you hand that cash flow directly back to the remnants of a kleptocracy, the money just vanishes into offshore accounts while the people continue to starve. Secretary Rubio was explicit that this mechanism is for the benefit of the Venezuelan populace. It ensures that the oil wealth actually pays for food, infrastructure, and medicine. It's a temporary guardianship to prevent theft. That seems like responsible governance, not theft.
If it were happening in a vacuum, maybe I'd agree. But this isn't just about Venezuela. We have to look at the wider geopolitical game board. President Trump was incredibly candid, perhaps a little too candid about the broader intent here. He admitted that the oil blockade and the pressure on Venezuela are also intended to make Cuba collapse. His exact words were, "Cuba is really a nation that is very close to falling."
Which just acknowledges the reality that Havana and Caracas are part of the same support system.
It proves that this is a domino strategy. This is regime change weaponized through energy control. You cut the Venezuela lifeline to starve Cuba. So when you have the president of Cuba, Miguel Diaz-Canel, rejecting these external directives, and you have Moscow condemning the operation as illegal, you aren't building regional stability. You are inviting a proxy conflict. You are telling every nation in Latin America, do what we say, or we will seize your president and sequester your bank account.
I think proxy conflict implies a level of parity that just doesn't exist anymore. Russia is, well, it's bogged down elsewhere. Cuba is economically destitute. Who is going to fight this proxy war? The U.S. has demonstrated that it can act with surgical precision. And importantly, look at the follow-through. Rubio has already walked back threats of further military escalation. He's pivoting to diplomatic pressure now that the primary obstacle, Maduro, is gone. That shows restraint. It shows the military component was a limited tool, not the start of some sprawling occupation.
I interpret that walking back very differently. That doesn't sound like strategic restraint to me. It sounds like damage control. The backlash has been immense. You have activists disrupting Rubio's own exhibitions. And more importantly, you have Brazil's President Lula da Silva, a key regional power broker, rallying Latin American leaders. He warned them that staying divided will make us all more fragile. He is explicitly calling for unity against this kind of intervention.
Well, Lula has to play to his base, of course.
It's not just his base, it's the market. The financial markets hate uncertainty, and they hate the idea of localized conflicts spiraling. The commodity spike we are seeing, the gold, the silver, the oil jitters, that is the market pricing in the risk that this doesn't stop at Venezuela. Forced transitions historically lead to prolonged instability. The market is betting that the vacuum left by Maduro won't be filled by good and decent progress, but by chaos that other powers are going to exploit.
Uncertainty is expensive, I grant you that. But let's talk about the cost of inaction. Leaving a nuclear aspirant Iran unchecked is far, far more costly in the long run than a temporary spike in gold prices. We need to pivot to the Middle East because the parallel is striking. You have a similar decisive move, President Trump warning that time is running out and deploying this armada to the Gulf.
Time is running out. It's the classic ultimatum language.
Because the clock is ticking, the international community has danced around the Iranian nuclear issue for decades. Diplomacy without the credible threat of force has failed. This accumulation of firepower is the only language the regime in Tehran historically respects. And the U.S. isn't entirely alone on this island. Look at France. They are backing the push to list the Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, as terrorists on the EU list. That is a massive shift in European policy.
It is a shift for France, yes, but coalescing resolve is a very optimistic way to frame a Western alliance that looks, frankly, deeply fractured. While France is moving on the IRCG, look at the United Kingdom. We have Prime Minister Keir Starmer currently on a 4-day visit to Beijing.
Attempting to normalize trade, which is standard statecraft.
It's more than that. He is there to reset ties with China. He's talking about a sophisticated relationship and chasing economic wins. Just think about the optics, the timing. At the exact moment the U.S. is ramping up military tension with Iran, China's strategic partner, the closest U.S. ally, is in Beijing shaking hands with Xi Jinping. That is not lockstep. That is hedging.
Nations can walk and chew gum at the same time. The UK needs economic growth.
But it signals a divergence in threat perception. The US sees an axis of evil that needs to be crushed militarily. The UK sees an economic landscape where they cannot afford to alienate the world's manufacturing superpower. China has explicitly warned against US military adventurism in the Middle East. When London is seeking economic shelter with your primary rival while you deploy aircraft carriers, the global order looks incredibly shaky.
I think you're overstating the strategic drift. The UK isn't abandoning NATO, but let's look at who actually holds the economic leverage here. You talk about fragmentation, but look at the news regarding Lukoil. This is Russia's oil giant. Amidst all this tension, they are announcing plans to sell their foreign assets to the Carlyle Group.
A US private equity firm.
Exactly, a US firm. Think about what that implies. Despite the sanctions, despite the rhetoric from Moscow about a multipolar world, a major Russian economic engine is offloading assets to American capital. Why? Because when push comes to shove, they need liquidity. And the U.S. financial architecture is still the only game in town with deep enough pockets. If the U.S. was truly losing its hegemony, Russian firms wouldn't be looking to New York for a lifeline.
I see the Lukoil sale very, very differently. That isn't a vote of confidence, it's a fire sale. That is a company being strangled by sanctions, forced to divest assets at what I can only assume is a steep discount just to survive. It's a symptom of economic warfare, not economic attraction.
But the capital flows to the U.S. That's the point.
For now. But look at the broader trend in the so-called Global South. Zimbabwe is intensifying its push for BRICS membership. The Central African Republic is reaffirming its partnership with Russia after their elections. The narrative from the planetary audience, everyone outside the G7 bubble, is that reliance on the U.S. is a liability. They see what happened to Venezuela's reserves. They see the sanctions on Russia. And they are actively building alternatives. You cannot bomb nations into economic submission forever without them creating a parallel system. That is what the BRICS expansion is about.
We hear a lot about BRICS, but let's talk about viability. Creating a slide deck about a new currency is easy. Building a bond market that rivals the U.S. Treasury is incredibly hard. J.P. Morgan's Crawford recently stated that investors are still interested in the U.S. despite the noise. We saw the S&P 500 touch 7,000 recently.
And then immediately retreat.
Sure, it retreated, partly due to Microsoft's earnings, but the baseline strength is there. The U.S. economy is essentially saying, we will enforce security, and our markets are robust enough to handle the turbulence. We are seeing resilience, not fragility.
I think you are mistaking inflation for growth and volatility for resilience. The S&P touching 7,000 is a number, but the story that keeps me up at night is the metals rally. We have to go back to that. Gold isn't just up, it has broken every historical record, soaring above $5,600. Silver is topping $119.
Which is typical behavior during geopolitical stress. It's a fear gauge.
It's more than a fear gauge. At $5,600, it's a lack of faith gauge. You don't buy gold at that price because you trust the US dollar. You buy it because you are terrified of debasement. You buy it because you see U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent expressing disappointment that the EU signed a trade deal with India. Why was he disappointed? Because Europe is prioritizing its own trade over the U.S. containment strategy. When your allies drift and the market flees to hard assets, the Goldilocks scenario is over.
I think debasement is too strong a word. Secretary Bessent was quite firm regarding the yen recently, stating the U.S. supports a strong dollar policy and will not engage in competitive devaluation. The administration is trying to thread a very difficult needle, maintaining a strong currency that attracts capital while simultaneously using tariffs and sanctions like those on South Korea and the pressure on the EU to ensure fair play. It's messy, yes, but it's not incoherent. It's the behavior of a superpower ensuring its economic interests aren't eroded by free-riding allies.
But you cannot have it both ways. This is the fundamental contradiction. You cannot have a strong dollar that acts as the world's reserve currency, which requires trust and neutrality, while simultaneously weaponizing that dollar through sanctions, seizing sovereign assets, and imposing tariffs on your friends.
Is that if you use it too often, people stop using your system. That is why the EU is rushing to deal with India. That is why the UK is visiting China. They are hedging against us. The U.S. policy looks incoherent to the rest of the world. It looks like flailing. And when you add reports of the U.S. preemptively considering attacks on Iran or kidnapping leaders in Venezuela, the risk premium on holding U.S. assets goes through the roof. That is why gold is at 5,600. It's a hedge against the American imperium overextending itself and breaking the financial system in the process.
I'm not convinced by the overextension argument because it assumes that inaction is free. That's the fallacy here. If the U.S. sits back, Iran gets a nuclear weapon. That crashes the markets. If the U.S. sits back, Venezuela remains a destabilizing narco-state ally with Russia and Iran right on our doorstep. The cost of inaction is a much, much more dangerous world.
But is the world safer today than it was on Monday?
I would argue yes, or at least it is on the path to being safer. The actions taken this week in Caracas and the Gulf are about securing the perimeter of the free world. Yes, it causes friction. Yes, allies get nervous because change is scary. But leadership requires making the hard calls that others won't. And ultimately, a secure world led by democratic values is better for commerce and better for the S&P 500 than a chaotic world run by local warlords.
That is the best version of the argument, certainly. But I worry that this brand of leadership is actually isolation. We are witnessing a dangerous divergence. The U.S. is doubling down on hard power, boots on the ground, naval armadas, seizures, while its soft power, its economic gravitational pull, is eroding. The EU-India deal, the gold rally, the BRICS expansion, these are the canaries in the coal mine.
The canaries have been singing for years, but the mine is still open.
For now. But security in the 21st century doesn't come from armadas. It comes from economic integration. By forcing the issue militarily, the U.S. risks fracturing the global economy into rival blocs. And in a fragmented world, the U.S. dollar loses its privilege. That is the cliff we are walking toward.
I disagree that we are walking off a cliff. I think we are walking up a steep hill to reestablish a vantage point we let slip. The world is indeed dangerous, and economic stability requires a removal of bad actors like Maduro and the containment of Iran. You cannot trade freely with regimes that export terror. While the market adjustments we are seeing are painful, they are the friction of reestablishing a secure international framework.
We can agree that the friction is real, whether it produces a polished gem or just heat and fire. That remains to be seen.
It really depends on how the rest of the world reacts in the coming weeks. If China pushes back on the Iran ultimatum or if Latin America unifies against the Venezuelan intervention, then your scenario becomes much more likely.
And if the markets stabilize and the regimes fold, your scenario wins. 2026 is shaping up to be the year where we find out if the American order can still hold.
Is certainly a turning point. Thank you for listening to The Debate. We hope this discussion illuminated the complex machinery behind the headlines.
Indeed. Dig past the headlines, watch the bond market, and keep questioning the narrative. Until next time.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.